This is the Street Smart New Jersey Pedestrian Safety Campaign. Again, I said I'm from Trans Options, which is a nonprofit organization that's involved in transportation safety issues. So first question I have for the audience is who drives a car? Who's pedestrians? And people need to remember that some of us drive, some of us don't. But we're all pedestrians at some point during the day. Why do people walk? People walk for mobility, need to get someplace. They walk to enjoy the environment, nature, and the good weather. They walk for the health benefits involved of activity and walking, social benefits of walking and seeing friends and neighbors. And it's basically a very cheap activity to do. So where do people walk? People tend to walk around town. They walk through parking lots to go shopping. They go to transit stops, school buses, frozen dessert trucks. They go to parks or the beach or recreational areas or the local library. So what is this? Why do you think this happened? When we see cases like this, we ask, why did this happen? It could be any number of reasons why this occurred. Perhaps one of the drivers wasn't paying attention. Perhaps somebody was going too fast. Perhaps somebody was talking on the phone or texting. Perhaps one of the drivers had been drinking. Or there could be any one of a number of different reasons why. Basically, this is known as a crash. Unfortunately, society likes to call these accidents, but they're in reality not accidents. In the dictionary, an accident is described as events that happen unexpectedly without deliberate plan or a cause, where a crash is the result of a series of events and/or conditions. In most cases, crashes can be prevented by changing behaviors, conditions, or events. Again, this is not an accident. This is a crash. If we look at some of the reasons why this might occur: speeding, distracted driving, drinking, not paying attention, unsafe brakes. These are all conditions or contributing factors that could have been addressed before the impact occurred. Let's talk about pedestrian crashes. Approximately 4,000 pedestrians are injured each year in crashes in New Jersey. An average of 175 people die each year in motor vehicle crashes as pedestrians in New Jersey. That's one pedestrian death every other day, and 12 injured daily in New Jersey. In 2020, there were 179 pedestrian fatality deaths in New Jersey. According to the state police, as of this morning, we are ahead of last year's numbers, and we're currently in the range of approximately 190 pedestrian deaths in 2021, if we keep going at the rate we're going today. So that is a concern to all of us. U.S. Department of Transportation back in 2015 identified 16 states with an above average number of pedestrian and bicycle fatalities. New Jersey was included in that group. And since 2015, there have been efforts underway statewide to bring down the number of fatal crashes involving pedestrians and bicyclists. New Jersey is one of the most densely populated states in the country. And that and the design of our roadways has an impact on the situation. Through efforts, the state, county, and towns in New Jersey are currently working on a number of taking a number of steps to try to address the pedestrian safety issue. And that's what Wayne Township is doing now through education and enforcement and engineering. So what's the goal? Basically, the goal is to prevent pedestrian crashes. We want to do that by changing behavior of both the motorist and the pedestrian. It's funny that when I talk to drivers, they complain that the pedestrians are the problem. And then when you talk to pedestrians, they complain that it's the driver's fault. So who are the most common victims in pedestrian crashes? Generally, it's it's younger children. Some of the reasons why younger children are involved in a high number of pedestrian crashes is they have no fear and they're very trusting. Walking is the main mode of transportation for them. They have issues with speed, distance, and threat identification. They can't tell how fast a car is moving towards them. And another common issue is darting out. That's where a child may be running after a pet, or perhaps running after a ball or another object that rolls into the roadway, and they run after it without looking to see if there's any traffic coming. The second common group of victims is our senior citizens. Again, some of the reasons for that include it's a common mode of transportation exercise for our seniors. As we become senior citizens and we get older, we experience physical changes to our body, including our eyesight and hearing diminishing, and slower mobility issues with our bones and our joints. A lot of seniors have medical conditions that require the use of medications, and in some cases that can impact our judgment. The other thing with senior citizens, and when they are involved in an injury, an impact type injury, it tends to be more severe because their bones are more brittle and they're slower at recovering from severe injuries. So there's a lot of costs that are associated with pedestrian crashes. Every time a pedestrian life is suddenly, unexpectedly, and traumatically taken in a crash, there are all kinds of costs, including financial, psychological, social, and that involves a lot of different people, including the victim, the driver, first responders, families, friends, associates, the community at large. The fact is that most of these pedestrian deaths are preventable. So who's at fault in these crashes? In some cases, it's the motorist. Perhaps the motorist failed to stop for a pedestrian or committed a crosswalk violation. In New Jersey, when a motorist is approaching a marked crosswalk and there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk or waiting to cross, the motorist is required by law to stop. In some cases, it might be driver detention. A driver may be distracted or may be under the influence. Another thing that we're seeing now is drivers are driving tired, and in some cases that may impact their attentiveness. In some cases, the crashes involve things like speeding, red light running, stop light running, and right turn on red violations. Remember, when making a right turn on red in New Jersey, you are permitted to do so unless it's posted. However, before making a right turn on red, the motorist is required to come to a complete stop before the intersection and yield the right of way to vehicles on the through street and pedestrians in the crosswalk. Pedestrians are at fault in some of the pedestrian crashes also. Some of the things they do include running or darting into the roadway and not looking. Failure to use crosswalks or not obeying the traffic signals is another issue with some pedestrian crashes. Inattention, distracted, or under the influence individuals may also be involved. And the other thing that we see with pedestrians that sometimes contribute to these types of crashes may be that they're not easily seen. Perhaps they're in a dark location at night, they're wearing dark clothing, or for some other reason, the driver may not see the pedestrian. There are different types of crashes that are involved with pedestrians. Some of the most common ones include mid-block crossings. In the old days in New York City, they would refer to that as jaywalking. Left-turning vehicles is another type of crash that's common with pedestrians, along with parking lots, backing out of parking spaces, and entering or emerging from driveways. Just a quick video.
I know what he's thinking. He can get there faster by crossing here instead of walking to the crosswalk. But drivers aren't expecting him here. They probably can't see him very well either. And at 40 miles an hour, if he gets hit, there's an 85% chance he will die. You might save some time crossing here, but think what it could cost you. See and be seen, baby.
Okay, parking lots is another issue. Wayne has a lot of shopping areas, a lot of parking lots. With these shopping areas, very congested, a lot of pedestrian traffic through the parking lots. You have people coming and going to the stores, families. They're thinking about what they're going to buy. They're thinking about what they have to do, and they're not really watching the cars around them. there's a false sense of safety when walking through the parking lot. Motorists are concerned about what they're going to buy and where they're going to go and what they have to do. They're also searching for a parking spot. And again, there's a false sense of safety there. A lot of pedestrian crashes do happen in parking lots, and both motorists and pedestrians have to be careful when we're going through the parking lots. Another area is backing out of spaces. It's difficult when we're in a parking space to back out of space. Sometimes we have trouble turning our neck or turning around or seeing behind us. And in cases like that, what I try to recommend is that when you're parking in a parking space, try to park a little further away, but park in a space where you can drive through, and then the nose of your car is facing out, like this black vehicle. So when it's time to leave the parking lot, there is no backing up. You simply drive forward. That's just a safety tip. Another area of concern is when drivers are entering or leaving alleyways or driveways. Under New Jersey law, drivers are required to stop before crossing a sidewalk, either entering or exiting a driveway. And they're required to yield to pedestrians. If they don't, then they're in violation of law. And if a crash occurs, they are held accountable for that. So it's another area of concern when we're driving. We need to watch for pedestrians and need to stop when entering or exiting a driveway. In traffic safety, we're involved with what's known as the 5 E's of traffic safety. That's how we address traffic safety issues. That includes evaluations. That's an area where if we have a lot of crashes or we have a lot of concern from the public, engineers and traffic safety experts and law enforcement will look at that area and see what steps need to be taken to make the area safer. If engineering or changes to the roadway design are needed, then engineers will come up with a plan. They use national safety standards to design roadway improvements to try to make the road safer. The other thing we try to do is what we're doing today, which is public education, to alert the public of things that are required for traffic safety. And then, of course, there's our law enforcement efforts, which the police department is doing, where they are enforcing the laws and educating the public on the requirements of the law, both for the pedestrian and the driver. Like I said earlier, there are things that both pedestrians and drivers do that contribute to crashes, and law enforcement works with both to try to address those. And then when an emergency situation occurs, a crash occurs, the state and federal government fund emergency response, paramedics, EMTs, first responders, so that when a crash occurs, the victims can get immediate and appropriate levels of care. That includes things like helicopters, trauma centers for severely injured. That's all done with research that's paid for through traffic safety. Crosswalks. Every intersection has a crosswalk. Some are marked, some are unmarked. Crosswalks can be located away from intersection if they're clearly marked. Okay, these are examples of different types of crosswalks. They're all considered crosswalks under the law. Question is, what these people do, what this lady and this gentleman are doing, is it legal? In other words, is this a crosswalk? And the answer is yes. Any corner is considered a crosswalk. Okay, on this diagram here, all intersections have crosswalks. Some are marked and some are unmarked. A, B, C, and D are all examples of crosswalks. E is not a crosswalk. That's what's known as a mid-block crossing. It's no markings, so not considered a crosswalk. When pedestrians are crossing in crosswalks, they have to way. There's a crash, a pedestrian crash in a crosswalk. The assumption under the law is that the driver's at fault. But again, it's based on the investigation and other factors. E, the opposite is implied. If there's a crash at E, the pedestrian is generally considered at fault unless there's some other extenuating circumstances, because away from intersections at mid-block crossings, the most is the law that has the right of way. So a little bit about pedestrian laws. Pedestrians must obey the traffic signals. Again, red means stop. Red means stop for drivers and red means stop for pedestrians. When there's a red signal, both have to stop. If they don't, they can be subject to a citation. Green means go. And then, of course, there's directional signs telling you where to use the crosswalks, where crossing is prohibited, and things of that nature. Again, pedestrians must obey all the signals. The second thing is that pedestrians are not allowed to dart out into traffic. I've had some pedestrians tell me in the past that the law says that drivers have to stop when I'm in the crosswalk. I can do whatever I want. I can just step right out, and that's not accurate or correct. Pedestrians are not allowed to dart out into traffic, and they are subject to a summons if they do. Pedestrians are expected to use the sidewalks. In some cases, there are no sidewalks. If there's no sidewalks, the pedestrians are allowed to walk along the shoulder of the roadway, and they have to be facing traffic. In other words, you have to see traffic, the cars coming at you. In this example picture here, the check mark on the left is the person that's walking correctly, and the circle with the line through it on the right is the person that is not. If you start crossing a controlled intersection and the light starts to change when you're in the crosswalk, example, you start with the light like this. As you start going across the crosswalk, it turns to a countdown number. By law, the pedestrian is allowed to continue, and the motorist cannot move until the pedestrian reaches the opposite curb. Again, the pedestrian is required under the law to use due caution, due care for their own safety. In New Jersey, in early 2000, they passed a law that said that motorists must yield to pedestrians. Those signs are on the left here. That's the old law. In 2010, there was a lot of issues with the old law, and they found that motorists were not yielding. So the law had to be changed to made to read today that motorists must stop and remain stopped for pedestrians in a crosswalk. And that is the law today, as cited in Title 39, and charges down below. Again, pedestrian laws for drivers. Drivers have to safely stop and remain stopped for pedestrians in the crosswalk. That means when a driver is approaching a crosswalk, they have to pay attention. If there's a pedestrian waiting to cross, the driver is expected to stop and remain stopped. You may or may not see these signs on the side of the road, and in some cases, they are putting them in the road. Motorists are expected to obey the speed limit at all times. Motorists should be keeping a safe distance from the car in front of them. If the car in front of you stops for a pedestrian, you don't want to crash into the car in front of you. So you want to keep a safe driving distance. You want to drive carefully with no distractions. And again, the law requires you to do caution for your own safety. Drivers must stop and remain stopped for pedestrians. Like I said, in the diagram here, the person's crossing the street, the pedestrian, the red arrows are two cars. Both cars are required to stop and remain stopped until the pedestrian completes crossing their side of the roadway. If it's a one-way street, the pedestrian has to reach the opposite curb line. If a vehicle stops for a pedestrian, another vehicle is not allowed to overpass or go around that vehicle. This is a very dangerous maneuver, and it's one that is summonsable. The white arrow here would be the first car. Ideally, the first car should stop a great distance from the crosswalk, which would allow both the pedestrian and the other motorist to see the other one. The dangers of speed. Studies have been done, and it shows that hitting a vehicle hitting a person when the vehicle's going 20 miles an hour, 8.5 out of 10 pedestrians will survive that crash under normal circumstances. At 30 miles an hour, the percentage of survival is 5.5 out of 10% pedestrians. And just raise the speed 40 miles an hour, only 1.5 out of 10 pedestrians survive a crash at that rate. New Jersey passed a law almost 20 years ago now called the Move Over Law. It's for the safety of emergency responders and maintenance workers. When a emergency vehicle, a service vehicle, or a maintenance vehicle is stopped on the side of the roadway with flashing red, blue, or amber lights, approaching motorists are to this includes approaching with due caution, making a lane change if possible, to the opposite lane, the lane away from where the service vehicle or emergency vehicle is. If you can't change lanes, then you're required to reduce your speed to below the speed limit. Be prepared to stop. Another law that I want to talk about real quickly is the school bus stopping law in New Jersey. When a school bus has the activated red lights and the stop arm out, any vehicle traveling in either direction on either a public or a private roadway must stop and remain stopped until the lights are turned off from the school bus. The distance you must stop is a minimum of 25 feet away from the school bus. This is a safety zone to allow children or passengers of the bus to safely cross the street and be seen by all the motorists. The other pedestrian issue I want you to be aware of is that during the spring, summer, and fall, you may see frozen dessert trucks around town, perhaps by the parks and the schools. When these trucks are out on the side of the road and they're serving children, they're supposed to have, again, the red lights activated, flashing lights, and a stop arm activated. When drivers are approaching these vehicles from either direction, under the law, the drivers are required to stop before reaching the truck and look to make sure there's no one in the roadway. If there's no one in the roadway and it's safe and prudent to do so, they may proceed forward at a speed no more than 15 miles an hour. As a pedestrian coming into the roadway, the motorist is expected to stop. So what does this mean? This is a stop sign, right? Stop sign means that drivers must stop for other vehicles and pedestrians. A stop is a complete cessation of forward motion. That means your tire stops spinning. What does this mean? This is a yield sign. This allows that if there's no vehicles and there's no pedestrians in front of you when you reach an intersection controlled by a yield sign, the driver may continue without stopping. However, if there's another vehicle or a pedestrian in your path, you must stop and remain stopped until they are clearly out of the way. Here are some recommendations for safe walking. Be seen, wear bright clothing, and at night wear reflective clothing and have a light. Have no distractions when you're near the roadway. Stay hydrated. Carry a cell phone for emergency. Stay alert to your surroundings at all times. Make eye contact with drivers when crossing the roadway. Plan walking times if possible. Avoid inclement weather, include weather where visibility is lowered. Avoid walking at night if you can. And let someone know what your plans are. Again, we're part of the Street Smart New Jersey program. As you drive around Wayne, you're going to see posters up around town reminding drivers that your head should be up and phones down. We stop for drivers. It's still for people. That's the law. And drive smart. We slow down for safety. And you'll see signs reminding pedestrians, look before crossing. We use crosswalks and wait for the walk. There's a couple of new technologies I want drivers to be aware of. One of them is called the rapid flash beacon. You may see these. These are starting to pop up around New Jersey. They were approved by the federal government about 10 years ago, and they're slowly making their way to New Jersey. This is an enhanced crosswalk with markings, signage, and here are flashing lights. When a pedestrian wants to cross the roadway, they push a button, and the lights flash, letting motorists know there's somebody waiting to cross. The second type of new signal you may see is known as a hawk high intensity pedestrian light. These are a lot more complicated. That when a pedestrian wants to cross the roadway, they're going to push the button. There's going to be a flashing amber light for 10 seconds, and then the amber light's going to turn solid. And then After another 10 seconds or so, the two red lights are going to come on. And this is the same traffic signal. When you see the red, motorists have to stop red. Pedestrians will signal across the street. And then once they cross the street, the lights will start flashing red. And that lets motorists know that they can leave once their pathway is clear. And then once the pedestrian is gone, the light goes to black. You'll see these in areas like New Brunswick, Newark. They just put one up in Morristown a few months ago. So they are in the area. Just be aware of that. And again, thank you for your time. This is Street Smart New Jersey Pedestrian Safety Program by TransOptions. My name is Dennis Kelleher. I want everybody to be safe.